Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar with DMW. Today, we're focused on engineering and developing digital products at pace. We'll explore more about what that means in a minute or two. I see some familiar names in the attendees, so hello to you and welcome to those I've not met in person. I'm Matt Bewley, and I have the pleasure of working for DMW for the last 3 years, working on a wide range of clients, sectors and technologies, guiding many large and some small technology programs and helping the management of programs, projects and architecture and the implementation of delivery methods and models. First thing first, I realise that you've all been working long enough in this remote context to get the drill, but I'd like to explain how today will be structured. You've all had the opportunity to submit questions online, and as part of the sign-up process, we'll be talking through those questions during the session. You'll have the chance to submit and ask questions as we go, as well as book some time in with our experts offline to discuss specific items in more detail. A few housekeeping points to start with. Please keep your webcams off to assist with the session stability, and please note this session is being recorded. You're muted automatically. However, if you have a query, please use the hands up function on the control bar, and the moderator, Matt G, who's here with us, will introduce and unmute you when possible. Today, I'll be joined by 3 DMW experts, Chris Lewis, Nick Hamman, Aga Kaczmarek. Chris is our engineering director, an expert in shaping and building client technology solutions, and leads our whole engineering team. Chris, just say hi.
Hi everyone, nice to meet you.
Nick is our product capability lead at DMW. He has implemented product-centric delivery models and has worked on the ground as a product manager for clients globally. Say hi, Nick.
Hi, everybody.
And Aga Kaczmarek is a managing consultant and one of our most experienced agile and digital transformation experts. Hey, Aga, how are you doing?
Hello, everybody.
So to start off with, who are DMW? DMW are a specialist technology company with over 30 years experience in architecting, designing and delivering complex technology solutions for clients. We're generally brought in by customers to solve really challenging problems that require deep insight into how to get technology right. Whether that be in deep data analytics, innovative digital solutions, complex cloud strategy and transition, or in guiding clients through delivery of complex programs. We have a very large proportion of our business which is growing every year and continues to do so is one through repeat business, and we have an NPS score of 9 or above, showing just how highly we are regarded by our client base. So to the main event, engineering and digital products at pace. For DMW, this is a subject that sits across 3 of our services and often utilising 3 of our technology areas, and we have experience in delivering these to 3 of the business sectors we look at. In engineering, in the engineering world at DMW, we call this product launch and scale. So why are we here? Business leaders demand rapid incremental quality change, whether you're in the private sector, the public sector or not-for-profit. Pace and quality are key to accelerating time to market for your new innovative solution. At the same time, we want to build flexible teams that can adapt new techniques, technologies and ways of working. This is made harder by the scarcity of truly skilled resources. So the challenge is, how do we fast track our engineering delivery, keep our people skilled, adopt the most flexible and consistently performing ways of working, whilst maintaining quality all at the same time? These are subjects that our DMW consultants are helping guide clients through currently, with our main focus on helping clients upskill and provide the knowledge transfer on the way. Today, we'd like to talk you through some of our ideas, but that should really begin with you, our customers, and the challenges and the questions that brought you here. So we set some questions to our experts, as you saw in some of the lead up to the webinar today. And we'll start with Nick. So Nick, let's hear a little bit about you, and we asked you how to get your team into the product mindset.
Hi there. Thanks, Matt. So just a bit about myself. So hi, everybody. My name is Nick Hammond. I've been working as a management consultant for about 12 years now. Most of my career has been spent in that intersection between technology and the business. And most recently, I've been working on implementing product-centric delivery models, as well as being a product manager and leading a small engineering team, developing MVPs for clients in a globally connected innovation center. So Matt, just to kind of come back to your question, so on a product mindset, I think there's kind of two key factors for me. How do you kind of drive the product mindset? Number one is the driving the customer centricity in the organization, and then secondly is organizing the organization around the value. And just to kind of briefly explain those two concepts. So customer centricity in my mind is again as a mindset of the way of doing business and focusing on creating positive customer experiences through the products and services that organizations offer. In customer-centric organizations, the customer essentially is the center of the business philosophy, the operations, and all the decision-making. Customer-centric businesses hold that core belief that the customers are the primary reason for their existence. And again, so every time a customer-centric organization makes a decision, they take it one step further. They look at the customer and they look at the impact on what that decision will have on the customer. And they use that as a motivational tool so that every team can start focusing on the customer, can understand their customer needs, creating and building a positive user experience, and then building a holistic product and not just a transactional product. It's kind of creating that customer lifetime value. And then the second point that I mentioned is organizing around value. Many organizations today are organized around decades-old principles, developing or looking at how to increase efficiency, predictability, and profitability. But in today's digital economy, the only truly kind of sustainable competitive advantage is the speed with which an organization can sense and respond to the needs of their customers. So the traditional organizational structure, it's just not up to that job anymore. Instead, business agility demands that enterprises organize around the value that they deliver, removing those key barriers like invisible handover points between teams. And essentially, when a market and customer demands change, as they inevitably will, the enterprise will be ready to adapt to those changes. So in my mind, the golden thread to a product mindset is the company culture and the customer centricity. I mean, empathy is a word that we often hear in organizations, but how many organizations truly understand their customers at the end of the day and truly understand their needs? How many organizations are actually using customer interactions and probably more importantly, those customer insights to drive their next product?
Absolutely, yeah, it's really good points there, and yeah, it's really important not to just provide lip service to the customer centricity, as you say. Right, over to you, Aga, again. So let's hear a little bit about you, and we asked you, how do you set up agile teams within a historically waterfall organization?
Hello, everybody. My name is Aga Kaczmarek, and I'm an agile coach and also lean practitioner. And over the years, I've been working with multiple organizations, helping teams to adapt to new ways of working, transitioning from the waterfall approaches into agile ways of working. So I think, as Matt mentioned already, and also Nick reiterated this, many organizations recognize that currently putting IT departments only in the corner of the organization and being a support function, that's really no longer viable. Digitalization becomes the heart of every single organization. This is why many companies start to look into agile ways of working, trying to improve time to market, competitive advantage, but sometimes they fail to achieve the full benefit of going towards agile. And if I was to give you 3 top tips while transforming from waterfall to agile, I would say have a big vision for your organization, but start with the small pilots. Let them experiment and let them learn. Second of all, try to change the behavior by introducing new ways of working. So implement one of the agile frameworks to make it easier for people to adapt to new ways of working. And the last one would be, and although it's last, if not least, it's the most important one. Make sure you gain support from the leaders across the organization, across all the levels, because they will have to become the change agents. They will have to model the correct behavior within the organization to allow the cultural change and cultural shift so that the whole organization can gain business agility, as Nick mentioned already as well. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Aga. And finally, Chris, let's hear from you. Let's hear a little bit about you. And we asked you, how do you ensure your engineering teams build a high quality service from day one?
Hi, thanks, Matt. Yeah, so as Matt says, I'm the engineering director at DMW. I lead our engineering practice. So we've got a great team of experienced software, data and platform engineers who help our clients to launch and scale products, exploit their data and modernize legacy applications. I suppose to the question really, as an engineer and engineering manager over the last 12 years, I've spent quite a lot of time wrangling with how to help teams of engineers perform at their best in large and complex, constantly changing environments. And I think one of the biggest challenges really is how to build quality products whilst getting to market quickly. And I think there are probably three big angles to this. The first is that those involved in building those products need to feel like they're delivering to real people from the outset, experiencing the operational pain of running a service as early as possible in the delivery. And so I think bringing the creation of a production service early into the life cycle is really important. Number two is really making sure that quality is something that can be built in without impacting the flow of value to customers. So as Nick says, things need to be felt by your customers. You need to empathize with them from the outset, and building quality in a way that doesn't impact that flow is about optimizing the delivery process through automation, focusing on what you can build and script to avoid you having to have manual checkpoints in that process of getting products out to end customers. And I think you can't underestimate how much you need to give engineers everything they need to receive fast feedback on their work. So whilst it's good knowing whether or not your product is being well received by customers during the development life cycle, making tests run as fast as possible is a really important part, so that engineers know that the quality checks they're putting in are actually working and they get feedback quickly. I think third really is just to make sure everyone, and I mean everyone, has an appreciation for the quality characteristics that make up the solution they're creating. And that means creating enthusiasm for topics, thinking of examples like security and accessibility that have historically really been neglected in the development process, not underestimating the power of giving people a reason to get excited about those topics. Maybe it sounds a bit ridiculous, but they are exciting topics looked at in the right light. Really helps to build that desire to build them in and to make sure that they are at the front of everyone's mind as they're building software and systems. So I look forward to getting to a few of these elements over the next hour or so.
Great, thanks, Chris. Yeah, I think there's a really good point around, getting that buy-in from your engineers early, because it does create that quality. It does create that sort of empathetic requirement for looking after the customers, and they can understand that sort of process from day one through to delivery, and not just sort of doing another sort of fake MVP for the leadership team. It's actually something that's going to be used, and that's really important for all the teams to get involved in. So we're actually going to go over to the questions that were submitted. I see there's a question in the chat already, so we will go over to that in a minute. But we're just going to start with the ones that were submitted in the invites. So if you do have any questions as we go through, please do, as Krishnan has done, submit your questions in the chat, and we'll do them as we can. So the first question that was submitted was, how would you advise the adaptation of strategy is communicated to the wider organisation without feeling the directional goalposts keep changing? I'm actually going to ask that to all of our three experts today, because I think it covers all three subjects. So Aga, I'll start with you, and I'll say the question again. So how would you advise adaptation of strategy is communicated to the wider organisation without feeling the direction of all goalposts keep changing?
Yeah, thanks, Matt, and I hope you can hear me quite well now. I think one of the changes that companies can make is try to put the customer centricity in kind of heart of their strategy, because this implies as the customer needs are changing, the organization will have to also pivot and change towards the direction where the market is going. So when you make it a mission of your organization to actually deliver value and quality to your customers, it won't feel like you're miscommunicating or you're changing direction constantly. You will be always aligned to what's important to your customers and to value that is important to them.
Fantastic, thanks. And Nick, over to you.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Matt. So again, I think as everybody knows, strategy or strategic changes is not an annual process anymore, and key decisions to capture new value is required on an ongoing basis. But yet, I think in most organizations, what we see is a one-day or an annual kind of strategy day or an all hands. But unfortunately, the old adage is true, right? So change is the new norm, and continual adoption or pivoting is required. So strategic change shouldn't come as a big change or as a big surprise to anybody in the organization these days. Even though business strategy is set by senior leaders, product management should be the link between the value or the opportunities identified and the strategic direction set by the leaders. product managers are continually analyzing the market, developing customer insights and market insights, or kind of working with internal teams to see where they can innovate and make more improvements or better improvements with current products. So product management should therefore also be able to convey changes in strategy to their teams or the value streams that they work in. So the product manager incrementally changes the product strategy to ensure alignment to the overall business strategy and the business outcomes. And this will ensure that each product team adapts and shifts accordingly and will address those strategic changes. And in that same sense, communication should follow that same structure, all the way from strategy through to implementation, through to the same teams and the team construct. And in that team construct, collaboration and agile ceremonies like program increment planning and developing key artifacts in product management like a product vision and strategy, a product roadmap, and aligning product goals and metrics, all of that will essentially help a product manager convey the enterprise story. And then, and probably only then, should a half year or an annual kind of all hands call be good, because that's where senior managers can step in and kind of see that the strategy is kind of staying on course.
Yep, good points there. Thanks. Chris, over to you.
Yeah, I think so. Taking this from a technical perspective, I think you really have to ensure that your product and engineering processes are built to accept change as a constant. And the important thing really is that they minimize the toll that a change in direction has on the people doing the work. Certainly, engineers that I work with are generally pretty good at embracing change. But when they most struggle is when the tools and platforms they've got available to do their job can't keep up with that. So flexibility and sort of the opportunity to explore new challenges is something our technical people are usually up for. But if it means that you're going to hit a brand new set of blockers or a repeat of blockers you've got over in the past to change direction, then that's when tempers start to wear a bit thin and things get difficult. So it really is that investment in the shared services, the platforms, the tools, the practices, and really working hard so that your engineering process can really tolerate very small pieces of work rather than large batches. Because of those of you that know or studied or interested in sort of lean manufacturing, one of the things that really empowered people to respond to changing customer needs was that move to smaller batch sizes. And your engineering processes and tools and practices are really no different there. They need to cope with those smaller batches, make it efficient to get small things out to production to enable you to adapt to changing customer needs.
Great, thanks, Chris. Yeah, we're actually I think it flows nicely into this next point. So Christian in the chat has put, how do project delivery teams stay relevant as we transition into an agile transition into agile delivery of products? I think this one's for you, Aga. Do you mind answering this question?
Yeah, sure. And thanks, Krishna, for asking this question. That's actually something that is commonly asked, right? Because traditionally, we work in those delivery projects and teams rather than focusing on the products. So we will talk about it a bit later on in this webinar. However, it's really important that you start with small pilots. So try to create a team which can deliver value to the customer and clearly identify what's the value. And as you go on, you can iterate on it, you can adapt and try to make it work. With your currently existing delivery teams, you can try to understand where's the value for the customer, what could be delivered first, or just as Chris was mentioning it, reduce the batch size. So chop it down to smaller chunks and try to deliver value sooner than you would have before in typical waterfall approach.
Great, thanks. I hope that answers your question, Krishnan. I'm going to, Aga, another one for you, actually. So if you don't mind staying on. Part of the challenge is to disrupt, but how do you implement Agile without derailing?
Yes, and I think that nicely feeds what we have just been talking about. So in my opinion, it's really important that you set out ambitions. So are we talking about getting a bit more agility into IT departments, or are we envisioning the whole organization becoming more agile? And, you know, the whole transformation is going across the whole organization. But once you set out your vision, I would suggest that you create small pilots. So we see great results with our clients who took this approach and created 1, maybe 2 agile teams, because those teams then become catalysts for your change. And at this stage, it will be very important that you select correct people for your team. So make sure those are enthusiasts, early adopters, people who will drive the change throughout the transformation. Try to make those teams successful. So make sure they are cross-functional. So as we talked before, in typical waterfall approach, you would not put together people such as developers, architects, testers, UX designers, and so on. In Agile approach, we try to put them all together so that they can actually work together towards achieving one common goal. So also select people who are T-shaped personalities, so people who have a lot of experience in one specific field, but also broad knowledge across the board, so that the team can be self-functional, self-sufficient, and deliver value to customer. At this point, it's good to bring on board an experienced Scrum Master or maybe Agile practitioner, somebody who will guide the team through these new ways of working. It's very important. For example, I used to work with a client. One of the teams was really strongly technically. They were quite newly formed team, but they were unable to deliver any work. So it turned out that most of the team members were actually coming from typical waterfall background, and it was very difficult for them to understand what does it mean actually to prioritize value and how do you operate if nobody tells you what to do. They were also very confused about what's the role of PO and what's the role of Scrum Master. So after clarifying this and clearly stating what's the roles and responsibilities within the Scrum team, what are the expectations towards them as a team, we started to really focus them around common mission and common goal to deliver value. And within a few weeks, the team completely turned around and was able to deliver high priority items for the customer. And that's really important, that you try to protect your pilot teams from old ways of working and you give them all the possible support to move towards new ways of working, because those guys have to experiment, they have to learn, they have to fail to learn on their failure. So you really have to make sure that they understand what we're trying to achieve. And most importantly, they will become also validator of how Agile can work within your organization. So give them as much support as you can to make them successful.
Lovely, thanks, Aga. So Chris, one for you, and actually I do see another one in the chat, but Adam, we've got a very similar question later, so I'm going to tie that one in a couple of questions. But Chris, one for you that was submitted. How do you set up engineering teams for success from day one, and how to maintain or embed technical leadership in a product environment?
Okay, I'll probably tackle this in two parts, although they're sort of related. So I think if I had to pick, number one enabler really for engineering success is around empowerment. So having control as a team of your own destiny. And that goes from being, say, a cross-functional team, some of my colleagues have talked about, with all the skills that you need, to actually having the ability to create infrastructure yourself as one sort of example. And I think that can be quite difficult for some of our clients to accept, because quite rightly, you can fear what happens if teams are allowed to do their own thing. And all of us have seen shadow IT emerge and people get up to all sorts of trouble when they're left to their own devices. And it's a real concern. And I think there are probably two things that we've seen that work well to sort of mitigate that issue and allow teams to have empowerment without threatening the organization. The first is really to invite those that are typically involved in technical strategy, and that might be enterprise and solution architects and things, to work with engineering teams in the early days of product development to define guardrails. And those are things that can be codified, in other words, actually implemented through automation, that enable engineering teams to do what they need to do without putting the organization at risk. And the key thing is that they have to be automated. So if they don't already exist, that's a thing that the team needs to deliver and prove work before they get on and really begin to make progress on the value adding pieces. And the second, which I think is particularly valuable when an organization is less experienced in sort of modern lean software engineering practices, is to bring in some experienced outside resources who've done it to sort of seed engineering teams and pair up. And the key thing is people will be upskilled in a way that doesn't build dependence on that outside team, doesn't build dependence on those external support. And we worked with an energy sector client who built cloud platforms that were too locked down to enable engineering teams to be productive despite their best intentions. And I think the biggest problem that the teams really had was that they didn't know when they were being held back. And that led to some sort of interesting discussions and approaches around how we dealt with that, creating those technical guardrails and addressing them. I suppose the big thing that we did there to deal with that was really to move to a more open source platform model, where the code that made up the platform was accessible to the people that were consuming it, and they could contribute things back and changes and improvements back as if they were part of that team. And so you can get that sense of empowerment in your engineering teams that enables them to be successful without giving them the full keys to the kingdom, and also builds bridges a bit with the people maintaining the platforms. I suppose secondly, around embedding technical leadership, it plays a little bit on the empowerment and autonomy points, I suppose. I think this is really about ensuring that people that are attempting to lead and guide technical delivery are trusted by the people doing the engineering work. I'm sure we've all seen kind of architects come in and try and interfere in what product and engineering teams are doing, and it being met with quite a cold response. And I suppose we've seen clients try two extremes and everything in between to get some control over what people building and writing code are actually doing. The first extreme really is having traditional architects dictating by rule the technical approaches that teams should follow. Clearly that doesn't work. More enlightened, autonomous, product-centric teams will push back against any control from the center, and you end up with warring. The other extreme, and I really only say this as to sort of serve as an example, is that you could allow engineering teams complete freedom to dictate their own technical strategy, effectively a free-for-all. And I think we all know that that's the road to ruin, really. So the successful middle ground, I think, for sort of technical leadership in these kind of contexts that we've seen work quite effectively in a digital bank we worked with, was to enable teams to nominate their own technical leaders and bring those individuals together into technical decision making forum alongside the more traditional architects, the people that represent the broader enterprise. And a thing that makes that work really well is just to have good, appropriate thresholds set for which decisions should be escalated outside of teams. In general, the more service-oriented you are, the more you've embraced modern practices for building independent and decoupled applications, and the better your technical guardrails, the fewer things need to be escalated outside of teams. So really, if you want that sort of structure to work effectively, that's an incentive to make sure you've got technical enablers that allow teams to operate relatively independently.
Super. Yeah, thanks, Chris. Perfect answer. Nick, right, finally, time to shine. We've got a question for you. I can also see that, Christian, you've submitted another question. Well, I can ask that one after this, and Adam, as I said before, we'll get to your question in a moment. But Nick, how do you start to shape your focus and product management role setup?
Thanks, Matt. Well, hopefully I shine with this one. So from my previous experience in the airline industry, the most successful approach requires taking a top-down and a bottom-up approach. And what I mean by a top-down approach, I mean looking at the overall business model and the operating model to firstly understand the flow of value. Again, how does it reach your customers? Then working with senior leadership to understand or to start introducing new ways of working and showcasing the positive aspects of product management. I'd also start looking at introducing new concepts like communities of practice or value streams, and how you kind of break down those specific teams. And then finally, developing insights on the culture of the organization. There's quite a few aspects from a cultural perspective that you can start looking at, and all of these different elements start breaking down the siloed approaches from the past. And it helps you kind of introduce business agility as a term into the organization. From a top-down approach, I'd also start looking at what is a product in your organization. Do you have internal products, external products? Do you have platforms that essentially support products? And from an outside-in perspective, is what is the user journey? Do you have a really good understanding of the overall user journey? Do you have a good understanding of the different customer personas? And again, all of these kind of combine into it starts the thinking process about the overall user experience that you want to create. And then from a bottom-up approach, it starts looking at the tactical day-to-day. How do teams deliver work? So bottom-up looks at identifying key opportunities to actually incrementally develop and test that hybrid delivery model that includes product management. It's all about starting small, like Aga said as well. It's starting small and then introducing one or two product managers or one or two agile delivery teams. And then firstly showcasing the value. And then once you've actually done that, then you can start scaling from there. And again, once you're going to go through this process, this will allow you to focus on setting up or adopting a product management framework within the organization. And within that process, you would want to start looking at introducing an extremely strong kind of T-shaped product manager, as they will essentially start working with senior stakeholders to align organizational strategy, key business outcomes, and metrics with that of their products. This product manager will also need to look at the wider delivery model and start influencing peers and bringing others on this product journey, essentially. And once the team is in place, the product management framework will support the product by developing key artifacts and start the alignment from the strategic top-down perspective and kind of bringing the top-down and bottom-up together. And once you're kind of in that space, that's essentially where you can start looking at your current organizational structure and start transferring some of those skills and roles into the newer hybrid delivery model.
Great, thanks, Nick. And I see another question on the chat. And actually, Thomas, we've got a question that's very similar to that in a moment. So we'll come to that about products and services and supporting products and for platforms in a moment. So we'll come to that in a sec. I'm going to ask Krishnan's question to, I think, both Aga and Chris Lewis, if that's all right. So this one is around, I'll talk it out. So is it absolutely essential to have the team members 100% dedicated to a product/Scrum team? How do we find the balance of focus in a DevOps team on how much development versus ops focus? Aga, do you want to go first on this one?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Krishna, for follow-up question. I think it's very important that we strive to create persistent teams. So we want people to be 100% dedicated to very specific Scrum team. And the reason for this is context switching is reducing productivity. So although you think you might be working on 3 different projects, in reality, you're just increasing the time it takes for people to deliver anything because they have to switch the context between 3 different projects. So if possible, I would advise definitely have people dedicated to Scrum teams. It's also about forming high-performing teams, which means people need to know each other, need to build this trust and collaborate with each other to make sure that they can perform well as a team. In terms of DevOps, I think Chris will be able to comment a bit more about this. In my opinion, there's a bit of misconception around DevOps model in the industry currently. So DevOps should go really about, automation, CI/CD pipelines, reducing the number of manual work. So by the end of the day, if Scrum team build something, they own it and then support it. And they support it because it's so easy to support it, because there's so much automation and so much continuous delivery going on. But I'm sure Chris can add a bit more about that.
Yeah, I think that's one of the big challenges with DevOps as a cultural phenomenon, is it's not very concrete on some of these things and doesn't really give you a formula for it. And I think in trying to sort of concretize DevOps a little bit, I quite often look to site reliability engineering as Google's kind of philosophy on running production systems. And one of the interesting concepts from SRE is the idea that a team should have, first and foremost, any team, whatever they're doing, should have a service level objective, or service level objectives, I should say, and particularly have a failure or error budget that defines how much stuff going wrong they can actually tolerate. And I think it's important, however unambitious that target is, that you at least have one set, because that determines how much distraction from new feature work you should be tolerating in order to keep the system alive and going. And I think that if we take the most extreme example, where you've set quite an aggressive service level objectives and you've got a relatively limited budget for failure, and you've written a really weak piece of software with lots of bugs in it, then the team's going to spend, or should spend, all of their time addressing that. If you allow more tolerance and you set yourself a less aggressive target, then potentially you can accommodate more feature work in the sprint without necessarily compromising on hitting your unambitious target. But the important thing really is that you set a target and you can monitor it very closely. We'll talk a bit about that in a second, and that you at least have visibility of how you're doing in terms of running a production system. I think the biggest risk is that you actually do as Aga talks about, which is you take on support responsibility, as you should as a team, but you have no idea how you're doing in your customer's eyes. You don't have a way of measuring that. And that effectively means you're running blind, and you have to apply techniques like sandbanking time for dealing with tickets. And that's not a great position to be in. It's much better to have numbers that really guide how much time should be spent dealing with problems.
Great, thanks, Chris. And we do have another question in the chat from Adam. Thanks, Adam. I will get to that one in a second. I will get your previous one in a minute as well. What we're going to do is we're just going to go to a question for Nick that was submitted before, which actually ties into the question that Thomas has submitted. So this is all about products and supporting products to internal and external users. So the question that we had submitted was, are there any differences when your product is both a product to end users and a platform/service to other products? And I'll just read out Thomas's as well, Nick, so Thomas' view is that we've recently had more interest from other internal teams on consuming some of the services we built to power our products. We do treat our products as products, but suddenly we see the need to see our platform as a product too. Any advice? So let's hear your view on that.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So I think firstly, let me just have a look at. I think there's a lot of kind of different definitions for the term platform at the moment, and I think from what I've understood, Thomas, from your question as well, I think your kind of definition and ours aligns quite nicely. But again, our definition on a platform is a software fully managed that enables others to build their own or multiple products on it more easily. So while a software platform is mostly just technology, it is, in my opinion, and from what I've seen in my experience as well, it is definitely beneficial to treat it as a product in its own right, even if it is a technical one. Again, it creates the value of product development teams by making it easier and faster to build their products and generate value for the business by reducing the cost, accelerating development, and increasing the revenue. And subsequently, a platform should have its own product strategy and roadmap, KPIs, product backlog, and a well-designed software architecture that leverages the right technologies. Make sure, though, that the platform decisions are guided by the needs of the product it serves. Again, after all, a platform exists to help teams build better products faster and cheaper. And in other words, the platform strategy and roadmap should be derived from the strategies and the roadmaps of the products that are being built, that it's being built for. And that architecture should be designed to make it easy as possible to actually consume those services. So again, a software platform, therefore, is more than just a set of APIs. It typically requires the documentation that allows or shows you how to use the platform. Also, it may require different tools. Again, kind of if you look at AWS, comes with a cloud development kit that supports .NET and Java, and it integrates with different IDEs and hence supports developers to develop AWS-based applications. And again, so if we look at the overall kind of product management approach and framework, that shouldn't change. There are actually quite a few differences. It's not as much in the product management framework, but it's all kind of how you kind of approach it. So what I would kind of suggest is look at the type of product manager that you would have that kind of manages a platform as a product. You normally have 3 or 4 kind of different types of product managers. You kind of go from a very technical domain-focused product manager through to kind of a generalist, and then obviously you've got somebody on the business-centric side of things. For a platform, you'd probably look at a very kind of technically focused product manager. And then the product strategy will include a different business model, revenue model. And then you would start looking at different key metrics, and kind of business drivers would be quite different between a product that is external or versus internal. And I think lastly, when you kind of have a platform that you're looking at from a product management perspective, you need to start looking at the developer experience as well, and not just the user experience. And internally, key design thinking methods can still be used with internal customers. Because again, I think the key thing to drive out of that message is to make sure that your product is, or the platform is led by the users, and it's not a technology-driven platform at the end of the day.
Great, yeah, all about finding that value and where you can make the opportunity from that. So right, Adam, here we go. Time to answer your question. We had one submitted very similar to this. I'll just read that out very briefly. This is to Chris. So what's the value of running in production from day one, and how would you communicate that value to skeptical stakeholders? I think this ties nicely into Adam's point. So the move to be lean and deliver those small batches is often requires investment in those platforms, shared services, and practices that you mentioned. How do you describe the value of agility to secure C-suite buy-in and sponsorship for investment?
Okay, thanks, and thanks, Adam, for the question. I think I'll what I'll do is I'll come back to Adam's question as I finish off this answer with a concrete example where we had this kind of conversation elsewhere. I suppose the first thing to say about running in production really is when you look at Agile in any form that it takes, any methodology approach, It really emphasizes the importance of prioritizing work based on the highest value to customers, and that is it's a good key point. But we've seen ambitious product owners take that idea the wrong way and forget that everything they do has a quality dimension. Everything should have a feel to customers that is good, regardless of what that value happens to be. All those customers won't be coming back. And similarly, we've seen people deprioritize technical enablers for quality because they don't obviously demonstrate direct customer value. And that's quite often the case when deadlines are looming and the pressure is on. And I think those are both traps that are quite easy to fall into if your engineers don't feel that things that they are doing are really reaching or impacting real users. And that's a real possibility if you're only deploying into test environments, for instance, with little or only occasional user interaction. So I think one of the best ways to ensure that quality is there is to ensure that work is being experienced by real end users from the outset in as realistic an environment as possible. And so that's why we talk about making sure you're delivering to production from day one, really. And I suppose to define production in our view, that's really an environment that you operate with the care that real users would expect. So that means with respect to availability, security, performance, scale, and all those other non-functionals. But crucially, those characteristics don't have to be perfect from the outset. So you don't need a fully scaled 5 nines availability product if you've only got 5 pilot users. This really ties into the question I was asked about DevOps a minute ago. What you do have to have, though, is that idea of your, even when your product's at its simplest, as to how well you're actually doing, having that monitoring, observability, that ability to see just how you're scoring in terms of service level objectives right from the outset. And that's really what we define as the value of running in production from day one. It forces you to think about and build what you need to know, how you're doing from the perspective of real users, forces you to think about what that controlled and automated process for changing that production environment is going to be, your pipelines, your automated tests and all that stuff, and any intermediate environments you might need to sort of run those. So building that stuff early, you really can spread the cost of improving those foundations over many product cycles rather than embark on a huge hardening exercise weeks or months down the line. And I suppose, so coming back to the question about skepticism and things and building foundations, people are rightly skeptical about building production early. They're skeptical about building foundations early before they're really needed. And I think that's born out of a lot of experience that others have had of build it as they'll come type mentality with platforms that are created at great expense and never really consumed. And I suppose looking at the value of building production first, that's really something you have to weigh up against your confidence in your product's idea against the ultimate costs and value of building basic capability from the outset. I think the thing that's really good these days is the cloud makes it possible to build production capabilities and shared services that can be scaled later. So in many cases, you're not beholden to building something that's gold standard, a Rolls Royce from the outset. And we sometimes see people that are a bit nervous about building production early because it will potentially slow the innovation cycle. This idea that you might have a gate to release things to customers sooner than perhaps you want one makes people a bit more resistant to doing that. And I suppose we see skeptics convinced of the value of running in production early when they see the benefits for themselves. Having a very basic product running in a well-instrumented production environment where you can experiment and see, and customers can see immediately how things work, is a really great thing to have. I'm thinking about Adam's question and shared services, and particularly platforms, and sort of conveying that benefit and defeating skepticism. We used an approach I'll call, or make up on the spot here, called a challenge initiative. Essentially, it was speaking to some senior stakeholders who we knew were involved in the decision to sort of build these foundations, and saying, look, we know it seems a bit crazy that we need to do these things so early on, but how about you tell us about something you really struggled to get going in the past. Tell us about a business initiative you thought should be really easy but has proven to be really hard, and we'll show you, given a bit of power, just how quickly we can do that. And essentially what we did was to say, we've got a bit of reporting that this particular ExCo member really wishes they could see. They've told us that's what they'd like to see. If we take all the brakes off that would normally be there, we remove all the restrictions that are normally in the fully managed cloud environments in this client, and we let an engineering team that's fully empowered deliver this, how quickly can we do it? And we did that. We built a particular new reporting capability for this end client, for this Exco member. They were really impressed by how quickly we did it. And then we led it into a conversation about what we would need to build to do that more regularly, to do that more easily, and to do it at scale. Extracted the bits that we regarded as the platform and said, these are the things that we need to invest in. This is the stuff that needs to be there. And in this particular instance, it was things like fundamental single sign-on infrastructure. It was the ability to use serverless in AWS. It was stuff that was typically turned off within their existing enterprise managed cloud, and made the case to them that way by demonstrating some real value. And it doesn't, it really relies on having someone at a senior enough level that's willing to take a risk in order to be proven potentially wrong. And not every executive is necessarily up for that. But in this case, they were, and it really gave us an opportunity to show them what having access to things that weren't normally there might actually be able to do for people.
Great, thanks, Chris. Right, so we'll take on Adam's next question here. So I'm actually going to ask this one to Aga, because I think you mentioned about T-shaped people earlier, and I think this is probably quite relevant for that. So Adam asks, working on a product can sometimes mean the team becomes specialists. How do you balance the ambition to build cross-functional teams that can solve any problems with the need for specialism and a narrow focus on a single product?
Yeah, thanks, Adam, for asking this question. Yeah, I can understand if you start with the pilot team and you have only one product that you're trying to deliver, it might become a bit boring for the team at some time, or maybe we don't see a lot of opportunities for people to kind of cross-skill. But I think it's very important that the team, inside the team themselves, they try to make sure that they spread the knowledge within the team so that they are truly cross-functional and self-sufficient. But of course, Agile is about constant learning journey and making sure that we cultivate growth mindset. So I don't think there's anything stopping us from, organizing a hackathon or organizing community of practice where people can actually share knowledge, can work on very specific problem and solve it, or even, how to solve any problem in 5-day sprints. There's a great book about this methodology I would advise to anybody. You can organize a 5-day sprint problem-solving exercise for people just to learn more. So I think it's very important to give people opportunities. And as you move forward and hopefully scale your agility across the organization, it will become easier to rotate people perhaps, or change the products, or from time to time go for some sort of secondment opportunities. This really helps in scaling up people and really making those teams cross-functional and highly motivated.
Cool, thanks, Aga. Chris, one I'm going to ask for you, this is it's an interesting one. So often seen in clients when moving towards a more agile mindset, fear of loss of governance is the most important sort of thing. Is you lose a context of sort of security in those governance settings if you do move to agile. So the question was, how do you instill security awareness in engineering teams, and more broadly, how would you ensure quality is first-class concern in those teams?
All right, so I think starting with this, I'd like to draw out the term awareness. So what does security awareness really mean when we're talking about empowered, decentralized teams that we've kind of been talking about? And we have worked in lots of places where awareness seems to just be telling people what the threats are. A typical example is security awareness training that is a staple of particular financial services organizations. And that doesn't really sit well, at least not in my mind, with the idea of arming people what they need to do or need to know to make decisions themselves, especially in regards to security. So really the way I tend to look at it is less about awareness and more about an appreciation, a genuine curiosity and understanding of what someone with the right time, skills, motivation could do to a system you're building. And yes, it's a little bit about building fear, a bit of healthy concern that nasty things can and do happen. And so appreciation isn't something that's easily developed when you just put people in front of PowerPoint training. That kind of training definitely doesn't make the most of a growth mindset, a learning mindset that's so common in sort of teams built of the best engineers these days. So from the security perspective in particular, I think firstly, you should prioritize doing things that give engineers a chance to appreciate security as an engineering practice, something that's got to be inherent in what they do. One option, the most extreme end, is to send your engineers to security conferences, something that's a lot easier at the moment when everything's virtual. Give them a chance to see and be amongst others in the same profession, but whose work always puts security first. I think we tried this in a public sector client where quite a large number of engineers were able to participate in the security conference, and they got to see really the state of the art, the creativity, the innovation that goes with the leading edge of security. When you get to see something like DEF CON in action and what people can do to systems with the latest and the most in-depth engineering capabilities, that really does open people's eyes and gives them a chance to sort of see that this isn't just something that you get told to do. It's really something you need to think about as you build. I suppose secondly, something you can do is to start to make sure your teams, as far as possible, have people with security engineering skills amongst them. And I'm not talking sort of security architects here, but real security engineers with a passion for breaking and then making improvements to systems. Knowledge and passion of those people with those skill sets rapidly permeates through highly motivated and learning-oriented teams. So you get a lot of value for what tend to be quite expensive, but extremely experienced security resources, particularly in fast-moving setups. And I suppose the last thing really is that security awareness isn't something you can address once. It has to be practiced and honed. And so you need a systematic processes for exploring and unearthing security issues in your products. And our favorite sort of hands-on strategy for doing this is threat modeling, getting teams around the whiteboard as a matter of routine, and enumerating and thinking through all the potential threats to a new domain, and importantly, what the potential mitigations are. So it's not just ensuring that the teams have a chance to exhaustively explore the problem space, but it also helps to share knowledge of potential attack vectors, especially when you've got really experienced security engineers in the mix who can throw in things that perhaps you didn't think of. And I suppose a side benefit of it, if you involve your product people, is that they get a chance to appreciate just how much work is needed to build security in as another element of quality into a product. And so I think it's important that time and space is set aside for that kind of systemic threat modeling type work. And so I think this really plays into your broader question, Matt, around embedding quality and how you make that happen. It is a large part about leadership, about product owners and their management, understanding that features out the door aren't worth having unless quality is built in. And that message needs to come from those leaders from the start. It needs to be backed by actions rather than words. And so it means giving teams the capacity to build pipelines with automated quality checks and things built in at the start, slimming down the ask on features if it's clear that quality is going to suffer when they inflate. And I suppose always listening when teams tell you they're going to need to cut corners to deliver. And I've seen countless times when people have said, you know what, we're actually going to have to cut some corners to do this. And the answer's just been, well, do it anyway. I think eliminating or trying to reduce that occurrence is quite key.
Fantastic, thanks, Chris. Right, we're going to do our final question before we do a quick wrap-up summary with the speakers today. And just like to remind anyone who's on the call that we are recording this, so if you do need to drop off, then you can have the recording afterwards. Aga, final question for you. Let's make it really short if possible. How would you demonstrate the value of an Agile pilot?
Yes, thanks. I will keep it very short. I think the true value of the Agile pilots is actually when you ask customers or end users for feedback, because you will see that they are way more satisfied with some sort of value being delivered by the team. And second of all, we see that the teams tend to be way more motivated because we really focus their work around delivering something that somebody really wants and finds of value and desirable. So those would be the two top indicators I would mention here.
Super, nice short answer. Perfect, thanks. Right, so we've sort of come to the end or ending of this webinar, and it's been a real pleasure. But I just want to get some key messages from our speakers today. So first, Chris, let's just hear your couple of takeaway messages from today's webinar.
Yeah, so I suppose the first one is really to iterate on a product in production from the beginning. So as I said, it's easier to build a path to production when your product's simpler and improve on it as your product grows. The example I would give is you're starting out from afresh. It's It's much easier to put let's say a cat animation in production, a cat GIF on a web page in production, and then build on top of that when you've got a really good pipeline to deliver that, than it is to start with an application that's been well elaborated, it's got lots of moving parts, and try and build a path to production for that. Start simpler, or start building production when things are simpler, and iterate. Second thing is that production doesn't mean perfection. The first and most important thing to remember is that your teams need to give feedback from, or get feedback from an environment that you respect, like it's serving real users, and to have some objectives that you can improve on. So that idea of having a service level objective and a sort of a failure budget that gives you a sense as to how you're doing, that's really achievable at the start, but that you gradually ratchet up over time, can help to drive the right behaviors. And I think finally, using a learning mindset to your advantage. So talked about quality, and particularly security, applies to all quality and non-functionals really. Make your quality criteria something that people can relate to, that they want to know more about and want to improve. I can promise you that there are interesting speakers and things that you can participate in for every single non-functional characteristic, whether it's security, accessibility, or performance, and making sure that teams have a chance to experience and understand why those things are important, how they can make it better is a really good way to keep those dimensions in mind.
Thanks, Chris. Nick, throw over to you.
Thanks, Matt. So I think kind of two key things for me is, number one is kind of customer centricity. Again, at the end of the day, work with your customers, get to know them. What do they want at the end of the day, right? What do they need? Do you know what their pain points are? Again, kind of be customer obsessed and keep asking them the questions. And then secondly, it's more internally focused. I mean, organize your organization around the value that you're trying to deliver. Look at the value streams, align your products within those specific value streams, and align that to the overall user experience and the customer journey. And then make sure your organization is set up to deliver that value to the customer as fast as possible.
Super, thanks, Nick. And finally, but not least, Aga.
Thanks. I would say make sure you empower your teams and allow them space to experiment, to fail, to learn, to collect feedback. And don't underestimate the crucial role of senior leadership on your agile transformation journey, because it's very important to achieve business agility.
Excellent, thanks, Aga. Right, well, I guess it's for me to say thank you to all the presenters who presented today, especially Nick, who's made the effort to present from his holidays. So thanks Nick, and thanks Aga, and thanks Chris. Absolutely brilliant. Thanks to all the attendees and any contributors who offered questions before or during the session. And if you're watching this on the playback, on the recording, I hope you enjoyed it and hope it was valuable for you. The conversation doesn't end here. You'll receive some follow-up emails after this, along with the recording of the session and the opportunity to book some time to discuss any of the themes that we discussed, or if you have any further questions, then please reach out to the nominated person in the email. We'd be more than happy to have a conversation with you about anything that's in your organisation or how you can apply any of these themes to your work. It's been a pleasure being your host this evening, and we hope to see you again soon. There's another webinar scheduled for, I think, around the end of September, which will be covering cloud. So please follow us on LinkedIn. Have a look at our checklist that we developed that cover all of the 3 subjects that we've talked to today, and that can be found on LinkedIn. And get involved in the conversation. You know, just comment, like, share any of our content. Feel free to give us your opinion on what we've spoken about today. Again, been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much, everyone, and good night.